December 12, 2018 seemed like a normal day for Laura Luelmo. The 26-year-old teacher left her small house in the Andalusian village of El Campillo to drive to school as usual. She had moved there just a few days earlier for a temporary position at the high school in Nerva, a town 9 kilometers away. She liked her new surroundings and wanted to settle into the small community quickly. But this day was not to end like any other. In the evening, she sent her boyfriend a final message. After that, all traces of her were lost. Laura was a lively young woman with big plans. She grew up in Zamora, studied fine arts in Salamanca, and spent some time in Mexico. There, she enrolled at the Universidad Autónoma de Puebla and deepened her knowledge of the humanities. Friends described her as open, intelligent, and sensitive, someone who found it easy to connect with others. After returning to Spain, she decided to become a teacher, her true calling. In Nerva, she was appreciated by students and colleagues alike. When she was offered a small place to live in El Campillo, she gratefully accepted. She wanted to live closer to the school and concentrate fully on her teaching. But during her first few days in El Campillo, she noticed something sinister. An older man, her immediate neighbor, seemed to be watching her every time she left the house or returned. He stood at his window or on the doorstep, staring at her but said nothing. Laura told her boyfriend about these encounters, calling him strange and mentioning that she felt uncomfortable. On December 12th, she wrote that she wanted to go for a walk to avoid the neighbor's prying eyes. However, it was very windy and she wasn't sure if she should really go. That was the last message she sent. When Laura didn't show up for class the next day, her colleagues immediately became alarmed. She was reliable and always arrived on time. A colleague who had helped her find the house tried to reach her by phone, but to no avail. Her family was also unable to contact her. Her father reported her missing to the police. The Guardia Civil sent a patrol to El Campillo. With the help of the landlord, they gained access to Laura's house. But the interior looked normal. There were no signs of a break-in, no signs of a struggle, no clues as to a planned departure. While the officers were still at the scene, the neighbor approached. He was carrying a laundry basket and seemed to be watching the scene closely. When asked if he had seen Laura, he replied evasively. He said he didn't even know who lived there. He had little contact with his neighbors. Nothing about his story seemed credible, but there was no concrete evidence to hold him. The officers noted his name, Bernardo Montoya. What they didn't know at the time was that Bernardo Montoya was anything but an ordinary neighbor. He was born on October 13, 1968, in Catalonia, together with his twin brother Luciano, but grew up in Cartagena. Even as a child, he exhibited antisocial behavior. In elementary school, the brothers set fire to a classroom. As teenagers, they got into fights, bullied others, and provoked their teachers. Later, drugs, theft, and violent outbursts were added to the mix. At the age of 22, Montoya began a criminal career that repeatedly landed him behind bars. In 1995, at the age of 27, he committed a particularly brutal murder. He killed a 72-year-old woman, Cecilia, who was supposed to testify against him. He broke into her bedroom, hid behind the door, and stabbed her 6 times in the throat. He was sentenced to 17 years and 7 months in prison for this murder. In prison, Montoya was considered a quiet, unremarkable inmate. That is why he was granted parole for the first time in 2008. A momentous mistake. During those few days outside the prison walls, he attacked again. He threatened a woman with a knife and stabbed her. She survived. For this, he was given an additional year in prison. But even after this incident, he was granted leave again in 2009. This time he fled. He remained in hiding for 10 months before voluntarily turning himself in. Again, he received an additional sentence. His actual prison sentence ended in 2015. But just a few months later, he was convicted again, this time for 2 robberies involving the use of violence. He was finally released in November 2018. just 3 weeks before Laura Luelmo moved into the house across the street. The police, who initially found no evidence of a crime when Laura disappeared, now began to investigate Bernardo Montoya more closely. In his statement, he claimed not to know Laura, but neighbors reported that he had often been seen watching her. The fact that he happened to appear with a laundry basket during the house search now also seemed suspicious. The police still lacked direct evidence, but Montoya's past, his behavior, and his proximity to Laura's disappearance made him the prime suspect. On the evening of December 13th, one day after Laura's disappearance, Montoya suddenly fled his home. A neighbor observed him and reported it to the police. However, the officers were initially unable to apprehend him. The next day, he unexpectedly showed up at the hospital with an injury to his jaw. At the same time, he visited a former prison acquaintance. For the investigators, this was a clear sign that he was on the run, but trying to establish an alibi. The police intensified their search. Specialists were called in and Laura's house was searched again, this time together with her father and boyfriend. They confirmed that Laura's sports shoes, pants, cell phone, and keys were missing. Everything pointed to something happening to her on her walk. No one yet knew the extent of this crime. In the early morning of December 15th, the search for Laura entered a new phase. Investigators analyzed the geodata from her cell phone for the first time. This showed that the last signal had been received at exactly 9 p.m. on December 12th via a cell tower near El Campillo close to her home. The police now knew that Laura had not gotten far. Everything pointed to her never having left the neighborhood. A large-scale search operation immediately began within a 5-kilometer radius. Volunteers, search dogs, and helicopters assisted the police. There was still no sign of Laura, and her belongings remained missing. Only her car stood untouched in front of the house. Suspicions against Bernardo Montoya continued to grow. On December 16th, the search was expanded, this time to a radius of 10 kilometers. Even more helpers and emergency personnel joined the effort. And sure enough, on that day, the search team came dangerously close to the crucial location. But she remained undiscovered for the time being. It was not until a day later, at around 12:30 p.m. on December 17th, that a volunteer made a gruesome discovery in an open field. First, he found items of clothing. About 200 meters away, the half-naked body of a woman. It was Laura. She could only be identified with certainty by a tattoo on her upper body. Specialists from Madrid arrived by helicopter that same day. They secured evidence and examined the area. It quickly became clear that she could not have gotten there on her own. Someone must have transported her. The only questions were when, how, and why. On the night of December 18th, the police raided Montoya's house. The officers smashed a window and searched the entire building. What they found confirmed their worst suspicions. In the living room, they discovered several bloodstains, which later turned out to be Laura's blood. Meanwhile, Montoya was being followed by the police on his way back to El Campillo. When he realized he was being followed, he jumped out of his car and ran into a nearby wood. But his escape was short-lived. Just a few minutes later, he was caught, arrested, and taken to the police station. What followed was hours of interrogation. Montoya remained silent for a long time, evaded questions, and tried to deny everything. But in the end, under the pressure of the evidence, he confessed. Not everything, but enough. He said that he had seen Laura on the day she disappeared, that she had asked him for directions to the supermarket, that he had lured her into a trap, a dead-end street, where he knocked her down and put her in the trunk of his car. He said he didn't rape her, but only undressed her. He claimed to have left her unconscious, but alive. But even then, the investigators knew that this story couldn't be true. The evidence told a different story. Bernardo Montoya's confession sounded like a desperate fabrication to the investigators, a story he was trying to use to exonerate himself. But the evidence was overwhelming. and it contradicted almost every detail of his version. First, there was the blood. Specialists found several blood spatters in the living room of his house, clearly identified as Laura's DNA. Investigators also found further genetic traces that came from both him and the young teacher. This proved that she had not only been in his vicinity, she had been in his house and had been injured there. Added to this were the results of the forensic autopsy. Laura's body showed clear signs of sexual violence, and Bernardo Montoya's DNA was found on her. This meant that his claim that he had merely undressed her and then left her behind was no longer tenable. The estimated time of her death, which had initially remained unclear, was also specified after a second examination. Laura had died only a few hours after her disappearance, on the same night she disappeared. The public prosecutor's office was convinced Montoya had lured Laura into a trap under false pretenses, forced her into his house, raped her, and then brutally murdered her. Afterwards, according to forensic evidence, Montoya transported the body in his car and hid it in a remote location. To confuse investigators, he threw her clothes in a different location and disposed of her cell phone in the opposite direction. He was also able to be linked to the phone being turned off at 9 p.m., exactly when the last signal was received. Particularly disturbing was the cold-bloodedness with which Montoya acted. After committing the crime, he returned to his home, superficially removed the traces, washed himself, and changed his clothes, as if nothing had happened. Later, he deliberately sought out places where he could be seen, as if to establish an alibi. The next day, he even visited an acquaintance in prison, the woman with whom he had been in a relationship. But not everything went according to plan. The police had their eye on him early on, albeit cautiously at first. It was only after his hasty escape and strange behavior that it became clear that something was wrong. During a search of his home on December 18th, investigators finally reached the point where they could no longer doubt their suspicions. Too many pieces of the puzzle fit together. Montoya's history also made it clear that he was not a random perpetrator. He had already murdered a woman once before, at that time to prevent her from testifying against him in court, and even after his release, he had been involved in further acts of violence. On December 19, 2021, there was a decisive turning point. The Provincial Court of Huelva barred the public from attending the trial of Bernardo Montoya, which was held behind closed doors. This measure had been agreed upon by both the victims' relatives and the defense. The family did not want any further public display of their pain, no more headlines, no more sensational images on the evening news. The defense, meanwhile, pursued a clear strategy. It continued to claim that Bernardo Montoya was not the perpetrator. Rather, another woman was responsible. Josefa, the ex-girlfriend he had met in prison. Montoya himself had changed his story and now claimed that he had only helped transport the body. His motives? Love, drugs, confusion. That was how his lawyer explained it. Josefa had asked him for help, and he had been emotionally unable to say no. But the trail to Josefa led nowhere. When the police investigated the alleged location where the murder weapon was found, a hammer that Josefa was said to have used, they found nothing. Josefa herself was summoned as a witness but did not appear at first. An arrest warrant was issued, but it later turned out that she had a watertight alibi. Nothing, neither evidence nor circumstances, linked her to Laura's murder. The defense tried another argument. Montoya was medically impotent. A medical examination was presented to the court to undermine the rape charge, but even that was not enough. The prosecution presented a detailed chronology of the crime based on forensic evidence, DNA traces, witness statements, and phone records. According to this, Montoya had waited for Laura on December 12th and lured her into his house under a pretext, possibly asking for directions. Once there, she tried to defend herself. A fight ensued, during which Laura punched him in the face so hard that Montoya later had to seek medical treatment for a jaw injury. But he had the physical upper hand. He tied Laura up, stripped her, raped her, and finally killed her with several blows to the head. The reconstruction of events painted a clear picture. Bernardo had acted deliberately. He wanted Laura for himself, and when she fought back, she became a threat. He then made a concerted effort to cover his tracks. He hid the body, put her clothes away separately, threw away her cell phone, and cleaned his house. Everything he did indicated that he was trying to buy time and mislead investigators. In the end, the verdict was unanimous. The jury found Bernardo Montoya guilty of murder, rape, and false imprisonment. It was a verdict that hardly anyone questioned. The evidence was too clear, the sequence of events too obvious. But even after the verdict, a feeling of emptiness remained, because no verdict could ever make up for what Laura's family, friends, and colleagues had lost. They had lost a loved one through the violence of a man who should never have been free. On December 10, 2021, almost exactly 3 years after Laura's disappearance, the verdict was announced. Bernardo Montoya was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder, with particular severity of guilt. This means no possibility of early release. In addition, he received a further 17.5 years imprisonment for deprivation of liberty in connection with a sexual offense. The fine was $400,000, compensation for Laura's parents and siblings. The verdict was an act of justice, but it offered no consolation. The relatives sat silently in the courtroom, holding hands. There was no cheering, no relief, just a moment of silence as the judge left the courtroom, a moment that weighed heavier than any words. In the days that followed, the verdict was discussed throughout Spain. Many spoke of a miscarriage of justice, not because of the decision, but because a man with so many previous convictions had been free in the first place. It wasn't the first time Bernardo Montoya had committed a crime, but it was the first time it had cost a young woman her life. If he had been stopped earlier, Laura would still be alive. This question echoed through talk shows, newspapers, and political debates, but no one had an answer. In El Campillo, silence fell. The small village that had become Laura's last home sank into a kind of collective mourning. No one spoke about the case anymore, but everyone remembered. The place where her body was found was never entered again. At the school where she had taught, her name hung on a hand-painted poster for a long time. Laura, we will not forget you. Her students were young, but they understood that something irreplaceable had happened. The teachers tried to put it into words, but how do you explain to children that someone is no longer coming because someone else decided to take their life? And every year, when December comes, someone quietly places a white flower in front of the school where she taught. A silent gesture, a promise that she will not be forgotten. Laura's family largely withdrew from public life. Only once, months later, did her father appear in front of a camera. With a broken voice, he said, "My daughter had dreams, talents, love, and someone took all that away. I just hope that her name reminds us all how important it is to protect before it's too late."